My sister Ngozi just stood there in the middle of the mahogany-paneled boardroom, her face completely frozen. This was the man she had called worthless, the man she swore would die in the Lagos dust, forgotten and poor. She never imagined that 10 years later, he'd be the one at the head of that table. He was the new owner of our father's company, the man holding our family's entire fate in his hands. It all started on a rainy Tuesday. It started with the slam of a door, the end of a promise, and a good man thrown out into the storm with nothing but a small, loyal cat who refused to leave his side. I will never forget the relentless, hammering rain that fell on Lagos that night. It wasn't the gentle, cleansing kind that cools the evening air and washes the streets clean. It was a furious, violent downpour, a biblical deluge that rattled the tin roofs of our neighborhood and turned the packed earth streets into raging rivers of mud and debris. This was a storm that mirrored the tempest brewing within the four walls of our small, rented apartment, where the air had grown thick and heavy with unspoken grievances and curdled dreams. The storm outside was loud, but the silence inside was deafening, broken only by the angry tattoo of rain against the window panes. This was a kind of night that felt like an omen, a physical manifestation of a world coming undone, where the very heavens seemed to be weeping and raging at the cruelty unfolding below. Inside, my sister Ngozi stood with her arms crossed tightly against her chest, a posture of unyielding judgment. She stared at her husband, Chijioke, with eyes that had become as cold and hard as the worn floor tiles beneath their feet. The warmth, the laughter, the easy affection that once filled every corner of their home had long since evaporated, replaced by the bitter, metallic scent of resentment and disappointment. The love they had built, once a fortress against the world's hardships, was now a ruin, and Ngozi was ready to condemn it completely, to tear down the last remaining walls with the force of her words. She surveyed the man before her not as her husband, but as a failed investment, a blockage in the path to the life she felt she was owed, and her entire being radiated a chilling finality. Months earlier, Chijioke had lost his prestigious banking job, a casualty of corporate restructuring that had sent shockwaves through their comfortable life. Since then, every desperate business venture he'd attempted had crumbled into dust, each failure chipping away another piece of his confidence, and more corrosively, my sister's patience. The savings dwindled, then disappeared entirely, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. For Ngozi, who had been raised to equate self-worth with financial success and social standing, this was the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal. "I can't do this anymore, Chijioke," she finally said, her voice honed to a razor's edge, sharp enough to sever the last threads of their connection. "Did you honestly think I married you to suffer? To watch my friends drive new cars and build new houses while I'm stuck here, counting every last naira just to survive? Look at us. We are nothing. You are nothing." Chijioke didn't argue or raise his voice. He simply stood there, his broad shoulders, which once seemed capable of carrying the world, now slumped in utter defeat, absorbing each word as if it were a physical blow. He was a fundamentally good and gentle man, a man whose kindness was his most defining quality. But in my sister's unforgiving eyes, his goodness was a worthless currency in a world that only valued cash. He had failed the only test that ever truly mattered to her. As he moved mechanically to pack a small bag with his few remaining possessions, the only creature in the room that showed him any affection was Miko, their scruffy but devoted cat, who rubbed against his legs, purring loudly and looking up at him with trusting eyes, as if to offer some small, desperate comfort in the face of human cruelty. When Ngozi wrenched the door open, pointing dramatically into the stormy, unforgiving night, she created a frame of utter despair. The churning blackness outside, the furious wind whipping rain into the room, and the lone figure of the man she was casting out. Chijioke bent down and picked up the cat, his intention clear, to say a final, painful goodbye to his only friend. But Ngozi scoffed a short, ugly sound of derision that cut through the noise of the storm. "Leave the animal," she commanded, her voice devoid of any warmth or compassion. "It's just another mouth we don't need to feed." The pain that flashed across Chijioke's face was sharp and profound, a new wound on top of so many others. He gently placed Miko back on the floor, gave the loyal creature one last, lingering stroke, and walked out into the rain without a backward glance, swallowed whole by the raging darkness. From the shadows of my bedroom doorway, I watched the heavy door slam shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the tense, heavy silence of the apartment. It was a definitive, brutal sound of finality, an ending not just to a marriage, but to a chapter of all our lives. Immediately, Miko, their cat, darted to the door, scratching frantically at the unyielding wood, and letting out a series of plaintive, heartbreaking cries that seemed to fill the entire home with sorrow. He was a small, furry ball of unwavering loyalty in a house that had just violently expelled at heart. Ngozi turned to me, her expression unreadable, her face a hard mask she constructed to hide whatever guilt or fear lay beneath. "He was holding us back. Amara," she stated, her voice brittle, as if she were trying to convince herself as much as me. "Now we can finally go home. Papa will take care of us." For Ngozi, returning to our father's sprawling, opulent compound was like slipping back into a comfortable and familiar skin she had been longing for. She effortlessly resumed her privileged life as the cherished daughter of Chief Okafor, filling her days with high society weddings where she was draped in expensive lace, and her nights with lavish parties where she glittered with our father's jewelry. She spoke of her marriage to Chijioke as a brief, unfortunate mistake, a minor and regrettable detour on her otherwise perfect life path, a story she repeated until it almost sounded true. However, in a city as interconnected and gossip-fueled as Lagos, a failed marriage is a stain that is not easily washed away, and the truth of her actions clung to her like a cheap perfume. The whispers followed her like a persistent shadow, clinging to the hem of her designer gowns and mixing with the clinking of champagne glasses. People were polite to her face, of course. Our father's name still commanded that much respect. But their eyes held a mixture of pity and thinly veiled scorn that she could not ignore. They saw a woman who had abandoned her husband in his time of need, and no amount of expensive fabric could cover that truth. Her attempt to find a new, wealthier suitor were met with polite deflections. She was beautiful and from a powerful family, but she was now damaged goods in the eyes of the elite social circles she so desperately wanted to conquer. A beautiful ship with a fatal leak in its hull. Meanwhile, Chijioke was engaged in a desperate, elemental fight for his very survival. He was truly in the dust, just as Ngozi had prophesied, but he refused to be buried by it. The first few months were a harrowing blur of profound hardship. He found shelter on the floor of friends' crowded, single-room in Surrelir, where the constant, deafening roar of generators was his nightly lullaby and privacy was a forgotten luxury. Humiliation became his constant companion, a bitter taste in his mouth every morning. He took any menial job he could find, his hands, once accustomed to the smooth leather of a banker's briefcase and the crispness of important documents, now callous and raw from manual labor. He worked on construction sites, his back burning under the merciless afternoon sun, his spirit slowly being crushed by the sheer physical toll of it all. The psychological torment was perhaps worse than the physical exhaustion and the constant, gnawing hunger. He would frequently see old friends and former colleagues from his banking days, men with whom he had once shared expensive lunches and business triumphs. They would be driving past in their air-conditioned cars, insulated from the heat and grime of the streets, and upon spotting him in his work-stained clothes, their eyes would widen in momentary recognition before they would quickly look away, pretending not to know the man who once commanded respect in sharp, tailored suits. Each averted gaze was a fresh wound, a painful reminder how far and how fast he had fallen. His world had shrunk to the size of his daily struggle, a lonely, invisible existence on the chaotic and unforgiving margins of the city. Beneath the crushing weight of his hardship, a weight that would have broken lesser men, Chijio possessed a quiet, unbreakable core of determination. To make ends meet and escape the backbreaking labor construction sites, he found a small, informal job fixing broken mobile phones at a stall in the chaotic, sprawling marketplace known as Computer Village. It was a world of organized chaos, a symphony of shouting vendors, haggling customers, and the constant buzz of electronics. His clever, nimble hands, which had once flown across keyboards in a high-rise office, quickly learned the intricate language of circuits, screens, and motherboards. In a market notorious for scams and shoddy work, he was meticulous and brutally honest, and customers, tired of being cheated, soon began to seek him out specifically, trusting his skill and his word. It was here, amidst the noise and the hustle, that he encountered an old man named Baba Ade. Baba Ade was a retired logistics manager, a man with kind, perceptive eyes and a lifetime of business experience etched into the deep lines of his face. He owned the small building where Chijioke's repair stall was located and had been observing the quiet, diligent young man for weeks. He saw something special in Chijioke, something that went far beyond his technical skills. He saw past the worn-out clothes and the weary expression to a razor-sharp mind, an unwavering work ethic, and a heart that remained honest and uncorrupted despite the world's relentless cruelty. One humid afternoon, he invited Chijioke to sit with him for a cup of tea, and in that simple act, a mentorship began that would change the course of Chijioke's life forever. Baba Ade started teaching Chijioke the intricate dance of commerce that he had mastered over a long and successful lifetime. He patiently explained the complex webs of supply chains, the hidden import routes that snake through congested Lagos ports, and the subtle, delicate art of the deal, when to push, when to be patient, and how to read the man across the table. He shared not just business tactics, but philosophies on life, instilling in Chijioke a new way of seeing his own dire situation. "Wealth isn't a place you simply arrive at, my boy," Baba Ade told him, his voice gentle but firm as steel. "It's the road you build for yourself, one painful, heavy stone at a time. The work is a destination. Remember that." Armed with the old man's invaluable guidance and a small, personal loan that represented Baba Ade's faith in him, Chijioke took his first tentative but determined step toward building that road. He started his own small company, a simple delivery service he named SwiftLink Logistics. His entire operation consisted of a single battered Okada, a motorcycle taxi, which he bought for a pittance and repaired himself. He used it to weave through the city's notoriously impossible traffic, a steel horse navigating the concrete jungle. His promise was simple but powerful in a city plagued by inefficiency. He would get packages delivered faster and more reliably than anyone else in Lagos. He was no longer just surviving day to day. He was actively, purposefully building something from nothing. The initial days were grueling beyond imagination. Chijioke was the CEO. The delivery rider, the accountant, and the customer service representative all rolled into one exhausted body. He worked from before the sun rose to long after it set, his body aching from the long hours spent hunched over the motorcycle, his mind racing with logistics and finances. He faced deep skepticism from potential clients, near constant gridlock, and a constant threat of harassment from city officials looking for a bribe. Yet, with every successful delivery, with every grateful and satisfied customer, a small spark of hope ignited within him, growing brighter with each passing day. He was no longer a victim of his circumstances. He was the architect of his own future, laying the foundation stone by painful stone, fueled by a quiet, burning resolve. Chijioke's big break, the pivotal moment that transformed his struggling one-man venture into a viable and scalable business, came from a contract with a small, independent chain of pharmacies. The owners were constantly frustrated by the late and unreliable shipments of critical medicines from their main suppliers, a common problem in the city that could have life or death consequences. Chijioke, hearing of their plight, approached them not with desperation, but with a bold proposal and a confident solution. He guaranteed next-day delivery for all their inter-branch transfers and critical stock replenishments. Skeptical but desperate, they gave him a chance. His service proved to be impeccably fast, meticulously reliable, and utterly professional. Word of this new, efficient delivery company spread like wildfire through the city's tight-knit community of small business owners. The success that followed was exponential and breathtaking. His one battered Okada soon turned into a fleet of 10, then 50, their bright green branding becoming a common and welcome sight, zipping through the gridlocked Lagos traffic. He hired other determined, hard-working young men, many from backgrounds as difficult as his own, giving them opportunities and a sense of dignity he himself had been denied. Seeing a larger opportunity beyond just delivery, he strategically expanded his services from simple last-mile transport to comprehensive sourcing and importation, using Baba Ade's deep knowledge of the ports to help other small businesses import their goods more cheaply and efficiently than the established players. The man worked with a relentless, single-minded focus, fueled by the sharp, painful memory of that rainy night and the sting of his wife's cruel words. He was becoming a force, a quiet giant rising from the very streets and goals he had thrown him into, Simultaneously, a very different kind of storm, slow-moving but just as destructive, was gathering over the house of Okafor. My father's textile business, once a titan of the industry and the unshakable source of all our family's privilege, was failing spectacularly. A proud and stubborn man of the old school, my father had refused to adapt to the modern world, believing his name and reputation were all he needed. He dismissed e-commerce as a fleeting trend for amateurs and stubbornly clung to old, inefficient business models while younger, more agile competitors embraced technology, streamlined their operations, and systematically captured his market share. The vibrant, colorful fabrics in his once bustling showrooms were fading on their bolts, a sad and potent metaphor for his dwindling fortune. Debts began to pile up like mountains, high and insurmountable, casting a long shadow over our lives. The substantial bank loans that had funded our lavish lifestyle, the European cars, the international school fees, the parties, were now a ticking time bomb, the interest compounding with each passing month. My sister, Ngozi, grew increasingly desperate, the foundation of her world crumbling beneath her feet. The wealthy, eligible suitors she had hoped would rescue her and restore her status never materialized. Her reputation as a divorcee from a family with declining wealth made her far less appealing in the cold calculus of high society marriage. She was a princess trapped in a crumbling castle, living in a state of frantic denial but haunted by the ghosts of the good, hard-working man she had so casually cast out into the storm. Her days became a painful, exhausting cycle of maintaining appearances she could no longer afford. She would use the last of her dwindling allowance on a new dress for a party, only to stand in a corner and feel the cold judgment of her peers, who whisper about her family's financial troubles. Her friends spoke casually of shopping trips to Dubai and London, while she couldn't afford to replace the worn tires on her aging car. The deep frustration festered within her, turning into a constant, low-grade bitterness that poisoned her every interaction. She was haunted by endless what-ifs, her immense pride warring with the terrifying reality that the foundation of her entire world was cracking, and she was utterly powerless to stop it. The inevitable end, the final crack in the foundation, came on a humid, oppressive Thursday morning. My father called an emergency family meeting in his study, a grand wood panel room that once felt like the center of power and authority, but now felt like a tomb, heavy with the scent of failure. His face, usually so commanding and proud, was gray and utterly defeated, his eyes hollow. He announced in a broken voice that the banks were calling in their loans. Okafor Textiles, the legacy of our grandfather and the bedrock of our identity, was going under. We were, in a word, ruined. A week of suffocating, tense silence passed. Then a letter arrived on crisp, expensive stationery. A private equity firm was interested in a full buyout of the company's assets. It was a lifeline, our only one, a single glimmer of hope in a sea of darkness. My father and Ngozi were summoned to a meeting at a 5-star hotel in Victoria Island to meet the firm's mysterious chairman. Recognizing that this was a pivotal moment that would define our future, I insisted on going with them. Ngozi, ever the desperate optimist clinging to her old weapons, saw this not just as a business meeting, but as an audition. She spent hours preparing, meticulously choosing her most expensive dress and every piece of significant jewelry she still owned. She was a warrior preparing for her last stand, ready to deploy all her charm to captivate a potential new benefactor, perhaps even a new husband, who could rescue her from the ruins of her life and restore her to her rightful place. We were escorted by a silent, stone-faced assistant into a large, cold boardroom on the top floor. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood, expensive leather, and old money. We sat on one side of a vast, empty mahogany table and waited, our own reflection staring back at us from its polished surface. 10 minutes stretched into an eternity, the chilling hum of the air conditioning amplifying our collective anxiety. Finally, the heavy doors at the far end of the room swung open with a soft, authoritative whoosh. A man walked in, flanked by 2 sharp-suited assistants who moved with quiet efficiency. He was tall and commanding, wearing a magnificent royal blue abaya that was exquisitely embroidered with threads of gold, an attire that didn't just suggest wealth, but screamed power, tradition, and unshakable authority. As he walked calmly toward us, moving from the shadows of the far end of the room into bright sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. My world tilted on its axis. My breath caught in my throat, and my heart hammered against my ribs. It was Chijioke. He was the same man, yet completely and utterly transformed. The deep-seated doubt and hurt that had once clouded his eyes, the slump of defeat in his shoulders, it was all gone, replaced by a calm, solid, impenetrable confidence that radiated from him like heat. He had not just survived the dust. He had conquered it and built an empire upon it. He took his seat at the head of the table, the seat of ultimate power, his gaze sweeping over my father and me before finally resting on Ngozi's stunned, disbelieving face. The room was utterly silent save for the hum of the air conditioning, a sound that suddenly felt deafening. Chijioke, Ngozi whispered, her voice barely audible, the name a ghost on her lips, a relic from a past she had tried to bury. He offered a slight, formal nod, his expression unreadable, a mask of pure professionalism. Chief Okafor, he said, his voice smooth, steady, and devoid of any discernible emotion, addressing my father first with chilling formality. Ngozi, thank you for coming. He paused for a beat, letting the crushing weight of the moment settle upon us all. I am the chairman of the firm that has acquired the assets and liabilities of Okafor Textiles. He laid out his plan with cold, hard, impersonal business logic, his words precise and sharp. He wasn't there for the kind of dramatic, emotional revenge we might have imagined. He was simply there to take over. He now owned our father's legacy, our family's name, and my sister's future. In the end, Chijioke didn't destroy them. That would have been too simple, too merciful, a quick ending to their suffering. Instead, he offered my father a consultant position, a hollow title with no real power, a gilded cage that forced him to come to the office every day and watch, in humiliating silence, as Chijioke masterfully rebuilt the very company he had run into the ground. To Ngozi, he offered a junior-level administrative job. He knew her immense pride would make it a daily torture to accept, but her financial desperation would make it impossible to refuse. He made her a front-row spectator to his monumental success, forcing her to live every single day with the crushing, inescapable reality of what and who she had thrown away. I sometimes see him at the office when I visit my father. He is always polite, always professional. He never speaks of the past, never acknowledges the deep, painful history that hangs in the air between us. He has a new life, and I've heard through the city's ever-present grapevine, a new family with a woman who saw his value when he had nothing but his character and his dreams. One evening, I saw him leaving the new, gleaming office building. In the back of his luxury car, sleeping peacefully in a plush carrier, was that same old scruffy cat, Miko, whom he had later found living as a stray near his old apartment and rescued. He saved the one creature that stood by him when he had absolutely nothing. My sister's choice on that rainy night began a story none of us could have ever predicted. She left him in the Lagos dust, convinced of his worthlessness, and he returned a decade later to buy the very ground she stood upon. He taught us all a powerful lesson, that a person's real worth isn't measured by what's in their pockets at any given moment, but by the strength, the resilience, and the integrity they hold in their heart. So let me ask you, what you believe is the ultimate measure of a person? Is it the wealth they build, or the strength they show when they have nothing at all? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.